So let's break that down a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm going to buy, there's 15 years left of payments, but I want to buy year 5 through year 10. I have obviously I'm paying more of a discount because it's future money, right? What happens if that note pays off in year 3 before it even gets to me?
Well, I probably wouldn't be buying the partial that way. I would only want to buy it when the next payment due is the one I'm going to receive, because I don't want my money tied up, obviously until the future. I guess you can do that. I never tried to do that, but that would
Sure.
be probably my counterattack to what you just said.
So you're saying is that I agree to pay 5 through 10, but when it gets to year 5, then I'll make payment. Is that more accurate?
If you wanted to do that, like I said, I don't know, unless I'm not understanding what you're saying. I
Yeah,
wouldn't do that. I would be buying year 1 through 10 up front.
sure.
And then in the future, if I only bought like year 1 through 5, and I'd be like, okay, on year 4, hey, look, like you mentioned before,
Yep.
Nathan, this is how we would just keep buying more of a partial so they could get. And we've offered that deal up front. Like, here's
Yep.
optional payments, right? I can buy the third of it today, a third of it in 7 years from now, and then a third of it, 12 years from now. I'll just keep buying it down for you. So I'll give you more than you want for it,
Yep.
right? Because I'm buying it in thirds, but I'm also separating, every 7 years, I'm buying another chunk. So when you run the financial calculator, you realize, wow, I can pay more for it. And I'm actually making more money because I'm only buying 7 years of payments at a time, as opposed to
Sure.
buying 21 years of payments.
So for those who are not familiar with, can you explain the different schedules? There's 3 schedules in a partial. What's the 3 schedules that are most common, the A, B, and C?
Yeah, so you always have the borrower's amortization is what they go by, right? That's how they bought the note. That's how they got the note created and they signed on it. So that's the one amortization. We'll just call that A. The second amortization would be us as discounted note buyers buying the entire note at a discount. So we would obviously, let's say that $200,000 mortgage we bought for $150,000. So we have a new amortization based on $150,000 to zero. All right, the same amount of years, same amount of terms, same amount of months. It's just we're stretched longer. So then there's more principal being paid down quicker, as opposed to the borrower's amortization where the principal is paid down a lot slower. So now we have the third, or the C amortization, which will be selling a partial of it. So again, you're just taking whatever the balance that you're paying at, and you're just going to amortize it down to zero on however many months you are in the deal, because we're assuming most loans are just going by a month as opposed to quarter or annual payments.
Gotcha. So as a seller of a partial, what do you prefer? Do you prefer to sell the front, the back? What do you typically prefer?
Well, I'm going to sell the front of it and keep the back. My retirement account is built for it, and I would think most people that do this would agree the retirement account is really the best play for the partial, because you can't touch that money anyways. And if you're not going to retire for 10 to 15 years, what better time now than to start when you're 50, 55 years old, and just start selling off notes that are in your retirement account for selling off 10-year partials.
Yeah,
amazing. So for a new investor or a new originator, it sounds like this is an easy way to buy and sell notes, right? Get some of the money, you can hold the note for long term, and you're not really letting go of the note as a note seller.
Correct.
You're still kind of managing it, that if it goes bad, you jump back in there and kind of fix things up if you need to. And a note buyer, you're kind of hands off. It's a performing note, but basically a seasoned investor kind of backing you up and walking through. If something happens, they jump back in there and kind of solve the day, save the day kind of thought process.
It's when I was doing a lot of flipping notes and brokering notes a few years back, that's typically how I would educate somebody new to the business to get into it, is to buy a partial, because I'm like, your risk is significantly lower. Yes, you're not going to make as much yield as you would want to buy the full loan, but your risk is really low and it's your stepping stone. And guess what? I'm tethered to you now, or Dave or Nathan is tethered to you now, to where you have someone experienced that has skin in the game with you. And that's the best way to learn, is to be with somebody that has skin in the game, that knows what they're doing. You can learn a lot. I wish we all could have had somebody like that, when we first started. Well, I'll speak for myself. I didn't have anybody that was buying selling me the partial at the beginning, but I also had specialized note training. But if I didn't, I would definitely want to have somebody there with me that had skin in the game.
So then what are some of the pitfalls? Like, what are some of the risks involved with partials?
Well, as a note professional selling it to somebody, I've got to stay on top of managing it if things go wrong, and be there to help the person on the other side of the transaction if something goes bad. It'll be a teaching moment for them and be on top of it. So it's great to run partials on the calculator and the numbers look great. And conceptually, once you get past the foreign language of this, it's pretty easy to do. The second battle is finding somebody to buy that partial, or finding somebody to sell that partial to you. And so there's a whole nother game to that. So it isn't something that you can just flourish and do 100% of the time. It's just something that when it fits, you should do it.
Yeah.
And that's what we learned in this note business, is like there's no one tool we use every time. We know 28 tools, and we just figure out which tool we need to use for that job.
Yeah.
With that investor.
What can you expect as a note buyer that are probably pretty new? What kind of expectation is partial selling at?
It depends on the time of the decade, right? So when I first got into this business pretty heavily, it was about 2016, and the note partial for a first time investor, the going partial rate was typically around like the 6 to 7% yield. As interest rates got lower, we noticed that people were able to buy partials and stuff at around 5%, if you can believe that. And then now typically I'm seeing that probably like the 7 to 8% range is kind of common right now. So for the first time investor that doesn't have a lot of experience, that doesn't know what they're doing, that's typically what they're going to pay for a partial, because they're just looking for that steady eddy passive income. More seasoned person, more advanced person is going to be looking for a bigger appetite there, because they're more active in the business and this is their full-time job, like myself and you guys. So we'd be looking for a different return, obviously.
Yeah. That's awesome. So when we talk about notes and note partials, one of the most common questions we have is what happened with servicing, right? What is that? What happens there? People get kind of flustered, right? Because they're brand new, they don't understand it, or even a seller is like, hey, listen, I don't want to move. Do note partials typically stay at the same servicer?
So they're not every servicer that I know of in our space that we all commonly know. I don't know if they all service partials. I've only heard of a few of them doing it and doing it well. So I just kind of stick to the ones that I know that do it well. And so just for example, because I know FCI does a couple of our partials, they know how to do it. I mean, they get in there and they understand the amortization schedule. They know how many payments that I'm owed, and they know how many payments the other person's going to get on the back end. And they run multiple schedules, like you mentioned, the 3 schedules. They go ahead and run a schedule for everybody.
That's nice. That's good.
So we have a question from Joe.
Okay.
Relative to the standard full note, how much faster or slower is it to sell or buy a partial? So I guess if you're going to sell a note or buy a note, that process, is it faster or slower to do the same thing with a partial?
I think it's a little bit slower to buy and sell a partial, because it's even more foreign to somebody as opposed to buying or selling a full note. Is another layer of complexity on it.
Sure.
So that's what slows it down. It's the explanation and them trusting the fact that when somebody explains something to you for the first time and they want you to buy something, you're just like, whoa, I need more research, right? The same thing happens when you're trying to explain a partial to somebody. They're gonna get rejection hands come up real quick, like, whoa, I'm not ready for this, even though it may seem too good to be true on the risk and the rate of return. But yeah, so it typically will be just a little bit slower. And it's because of the explanation factor.
And then what happens? Have you had a problem with when that note finalizes the term, giving that note back to the buyer, or taking it back from the buyer, or giving it back to the seller? What typically is that process to make sure that that transfers back to the original note holder?
Servicer. It comes down to the servicer. That servicer just needs to know exactly what's going on, and then you, as the CEO of your own business, you need to make sure that your vendors are doing what they're supposed to do. So just have some sort of notification on that timed event when it's supposed to happen, or about when it's supposed to happen, so you can make sure everybody understands what to do. Servicers do a great job, but at the end of the day, that's one loan of the 10,000 they have in their facility. So you just got to help make sure stuff happens the right way. The best news you ever get is when your bank account just gets a lot bigger and you don't know why. And you're like, okay, I like that hit, but what just happened?
Yeah.
So it's happened before.
Those are not clear. It's the same process to buy a partial. There's a purchase and sale agreement. All those things, parts are the same, right? And you want to make sure you run value on the property, because you may be in a spot where it defaults and your agreement says you take care of that foreclosure. So it's not always cut and clear, right? So you make sure you do your O&E, do all your due diligence. However, you have someone in the back end to say, listen, I'm kind of stuck on the O&E part. Can you look it over? And typically a seller who wants to cash out some of their proceeds will have no problem walking through the stuff with you guys. Because they're going to get fund up money in their hands so we can move forward. So good question, Joe. I appreciate you jumping in there.
Yeah.
With note partials too, there are a lot of questions regarding what is the typical process for them to sign up with a servicer. Does it typically change servicers? But from my experience, I would keep with the same servicer as that, because one of the most common issues when borrowers default is when their loan changes hands to a servicer. So keeping with that servicer, notifying if you're a seller out there, that servicer will inform you as well as your note buyer of what's going on if something happens. So they'll notify both parties, and both parties usually have access to that portal, the back end stuff, so they get notified of that. We've bought and sold partials before. It's a great way, I think Justin's point on, in your IRA, because technically you're just sitting there collecting money, and if something goes wrong, you can work things out that way. It's better than a performing note because you have someone you can rely on, and sometimes you can get cashed out, right? We've done it where we've taken the asset and we had to foreclose on it. We've also done the other way. The seller may actually be willing to buy you out based on your UPB. Another point, just to re-emphasize it, the Schedule C tells you how much is payoff. So if that loan pays off during that partial, guess what happens? You literally are going to get paid. The buyer of the partial will get their UPB, and you get the remainder as a seller, which works out for everyone. It's amazing this isn't talked about more, but what we found, me and Nathan talked about this before, we don't see a lot of partials for sale. Do you think it's people not understanding it, or people not?
I got an answer for this one. I got an answer for this one.
Yeah.
The reason why people don't buy partials that often, I think, in our business is because, I'll do the selling one. The reason why people don't sell partials too much in our business is because they need the cash. They don't want to wait to get that boom in the future.
Absolutely.
We're in a very transactional time in real estate. Nobody wants cash flow, it seems like. Nobody understands cash flow, and nobody wants to build on cash flow, it seems like. I know I'm making a blanket statement there, but it's what I see, and it's true. Everybody wants cash. They want to turn over a deal quickly and just get a cash transaction. They
ROI, right?
They don't want long-term income.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why you don't see people selling a lot of partials, especially seller financiers, the fix and flippers and the wholesalers and the landlord guys and the new people to the space, because they want that money in hand. That's what they want. They don't want long-term income. So we don't see a lot of people buying partials either, because they just don't understand the financial calculator benefits of it. I would love to buy all partials.
Yep.
Everything I buy, I would love to buy it. My risk is a lot lower. I'm in it for a shorter period of time as a fund manager. It's the best thing for me, and my returns are better.
So how do you do that as a fund manager? Because I haven't been able to get in my head around that. At the end of the term of my fund, I have to pay back my investors their capital. So how do I work partials into the fund?
You treat it as if you're just buying that part of the loan. You're selling that part of the loan. So if you bought a 10-year partial and you're 6 years into the fund and you have to sunset it, and you got 4 years left on it, well, guess what? I'm just going to sell those 4 years.
So you just resell that, whatever is remaining in the partial.
I'm doing it right now with somebody. Selling my partial with somebody.